and I'm drowning, entering into a space of surrender and release and just coming to terms with it. And so I start to give into the process of dying. And I start to fall in love with my surroundings. I'm beginning to be filled with bliss and love and admiration for my experience, for the world, for how perfect everything is.
Lelanea Fulton, welcome to Passion Harvest. I can't wait for you to share your experience and experiences with the Passion Harvest audience today.
Louisa, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and I have so much gratitude for the invitation, for being invited. Thank you.
I feel so relaxed and calm already. I'd love to start with your near-death experience for the audience.
When I was 6, in that particular ballpark of age, I did have a near-death experience through a drowning. There was pond a pond or a lake, they're small. It was, you know, manufactured, human made. And we would go to it often. And there was a deck in the center that you could either swim or doggy paddle out to, and then run and jump off of it, dive, cannonballs, whatever your heart's desire. And the shore that it was very small and everyone kind of knew everyone, and it was in the countryside. And I ended up biting off more than I could chew. I had a rhythm how I would get to this deck and how I would jump off. And for this particular period in my life, I explored comparison. There was another little girl who was jumping off of the deep end, and she was my height and my age. And I compared myself to her. And I remember saying, well, if she can do it, I can do it. But I didn't realize that she knew how to swim and I didn't. So I ended up jumping off the side that she did. And the water was much deeper on that side. And it's not the side that I usually would go to. So now I'm out of the eyesight of my mother, who knew my routine. And then I entered into the drowning process. The first few seconds was really me trying, moving into survival mode and trying to get to the top of the water, catch a breath, and scream simultaneously for help. And I went through this, quite a few repetitions before I realized that it wouldn't work. I either had to scream or I had to breathe in. And so I began to breathe in and then stick my arm above water and wave my arm around, hoping that someone would recognize that I was needing help. And this went on. It felt like the process went on for 30 minutes. We know it didn't, but being in that space of survival, really distorts time. And so I get to this point of surrender where I start to spend more time below the water than above the water. And the breath that I gather above the water really is just enough to sustain me below. And I'm drowning. Now I'm entering into a space of surrender and release and just coming to terms with it. And it's at this space that I'm leaving my body and I'm moving above the water. So now I have a POV, a perspective of what's happening above the water. And I can see my mother. I can see her starting to panic. She's standing up. She's looking for me. She's calling my name. And I can feel her panic. I can feel her nervous system moving into fight or flight. I can feel her fear. And I'm moving between that space and then underwater where I'm at. And I enter into a space that I didn't know at the time, but I recognize it now because I've had numerous tremors of it and then some large moments of it, but it's unity consciousness or oneness. And so I start to give into the process of dying. And I start to fall in love with my surroundings. I'm beginning to be filled with bliss and love and admiration for my experience, for the world, for how perfect everything is. I have no remorse or regret for the amount of time that I spent on this planet. I become very thankful, a great deal of gratitude, and just love, and feeling everything is perfect, even the dying process, even this process of losing my life at the age of 6 is perfect. It couldn't be anything different, and there's no good or bad. It's just an experience. And it is in this process that I began to hyper focus on everything around me. And something that I talk about often is I start to see fragments of the sand from the little kids that are all around me. And they're pushing themselves off the lake floor, and it's pushing the sand up, and the sand is moving up towards the surface where the sun is breaking the crust of the water, and it's hitting these fragments of sand in this amber water, and it's creating shards of light that just fragment from the sand, and it's cascading through the water. And I remember just sitting in that moment and thinking how lucky I got to experience this, how lucky I get to see this. No one else is seeing this, but I am. So that's my space of unity consciousness and oneness and just feeling love. And I hear a voice ask me telepathically, what would you like to do? And I respond telepathically, of course, because I'm underwater. I respond, she wouldn't understand, it would destroy her. And I'm referencing my mother. And I had made a decision to stay with that response. That response was me making a decision to stay, even though I was completely okay with going back home. I saw it as just going back home. And it was within seconds that I started to see the torso of a woman moving towards me, and she's shifting and moving through the water in this motion. And she has a single long braid that runs down her back, and the end of the hair is moving. The ends are under the water. And I see her coming towards me, and she's in a vintage bathing suit, looks like something from the 1950s. I've described it before as kind of that Marilyn Monroe one piece that kind of moves down into a little bit of a skirt. And I see her move towards me, and then I feel her grab me and lift me up. And my arm is still out of water at this point. So she grabs the arm and then my torso and lifts me up. And her back is to my mother, it's to the shore. And I'm still moving between POVs at this point, with like observing what's happening above water and my experience of oneness underwater. And she pulls me out of the water, and there's these few seconds, they're smaller than seconds, but there's time and space is altered. So when I speak of time, it's a very distorted representation of time, because what I was experiencing is very different than the time space of the third density, right? So there's this space that exists before I take my first breath and her pulling me out of water. And I'm shifting between my POVs. And finally, I take my first breath. And all of a sudden, my perspective quickly drops back into my body. And I no longer have access out of my body. So now I'm in my body, and it's excruciating and painful, and it's sharp. Um, and the expansion of the lungs feels sharp and painful. And so I'm back in my body now. And before I took that breath and went back into my body, I could see my mother see me being pulled out of water and see her running towards me. And then I caught my breath, and I'm in my body. And my mother pulls me out of this woman's arms and gets me back to the shore. And is making sure I'm okay, checking my vitals to the best of her ability, is, watching me catch my breath, watching me get back into a rhythm of breathing, coughing out all the water. And we decide, okay, well, the adventure's over. It's time to go home. And we start looking for this woman. She asked me, Lelanea, do you remember what this woman looked like? And I described what I said to you earlier about her long braid and what she was wearing. And my mom's scanning and she doesn't see the woman. And the woman never comes up. Like, you would think if you saved somebody, a young child, out of water, you'd be like, is she okay? Oh, and kind of comfort the child in some way. Like, that you'd want to be there just to like check up on the girl. But that she never came. So we went looking for her. And my mom went to every blanket where there was a family sitting and described the woman, described the situation. No one had seen her. No one knew of this woman. And there's only like 5 or 6 families.
Mm.
And then she's like, well, has anyone moved cars? Have you had to let anyone out? Nothing. And then there's also a lifeguard who sits in an elevated chair that my mom would always put her blanket next to. And so my mom's asking the lifeguard, did you not see any of that? The lifeguard like saw nothing. And like, again, this is extremely small with just a handful of families. And so it just kind of became a joke that I had a guardian angel. And we're not a religious family. We didn't believe in angels or anything to that effect. My mom's atheist, her parents agnostic. So, there we didn't fall to that belief system. But we did believe that there was something else happening. And not too long ago, I was invited to speak and tell my story for a documentary on near death experiences that is supposed to be released, I think, maybe sometime this summer. And the director asked me, who do you believe the woman was? And anytime I sit in the memory of this woman, anytime I think about this woman, because I never saw her face, I only saw her torso and below. And every time I just sit in that feeling and like go back to that space, she feels like me at the age that I am now. I'm in my 40s. And she feels like me. Doesn't feel like a stranger. It doesn't feel like someone outside of myself. So I don't know who that woman was, but I am grateful for her. So it's my NDE.
Thank you. And I was going to ask you the same question, but I love that. I mean, the obvious answer is an angel or the spirit guide, but when you say, I mean, you talk about reality shifting, one of my favorite topics, but when you say it feels like me, could it be a future version of you? Could it be a parallel version or we turn them past life? It's incredibly interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been many scenarios where I've heard a voice outside of myself. And they tend to happen when I go into these events of oneness. They call them mystical experiences of unity consciousness. And they've happened numerous times throughout my life. I've also been public about them. And when they happen, and even when they don't happen, when I have what I call shifts, I often hear a voice telepathically, which is outside of myself. It's coming from another space, but it's telepathic. And the voice always sounds like my own, as if there is a future version of me where the space between us, the veil is very thin, and this future version is able to communicate with me. But these voices that I've heard and that I hear um, in a very clear auditory type of way, um, always feels like like me. But in these experiences of unity consciousness or oneness, I'm often being given information that, even you, Louisa, you are me. You're a mirror version of me because we are both fragments of source that have chosen to incarnate as different avatars so that we could have different experiences, so that that information goes back to source, goes back to the collective. So you are me and I am you, just choosing to have different experiences. And through our emotions, both of us have tapped into the same emotions, experienced the same emotions, which is energy. And so through that, we have these deep connections in the human experience that can surpass the human experience and allow us to remember that as spiritual beings, we're essentially one being.
Yes, I mean, beautifully explained and just incredible you hearing these voices of possibly a future version of you. For those of the audience, and for me, just to clarify, what do you mean by oneness or unity consciousness? If you could describe it or
Mm.
define it, or perhaps give an example.
Yeah. So it does sound a bit complex, and theoretically and philosophically, I don't, I could definitely see and understand how it would feel a little confusing. I have a personal experience with it, so it's not philosophical or theoretical. It's experiential. It's felt. And the first one happened in the NDE, which we'd be like, of course you'd have
Yeah.
an experience of unity consciousness in the dying process. Um, but they didn't end there. They've continued. And they often continue in nature. I started playing with the experiences when I was younger in places of nature. So I just left the Pacific Northwest, and that was one of the most stunning places to spend out in the woods, amongst these enormous ancient trees and moss laden forests. And it's just an incredible place to feel the frequency and the energy. So we all have electromagnetic fields, also known as an aura. Trees and plants have electromagnetic fields, and scientifically, this has all been studied and recorded. And being in a forest and allowing yourself to merge with all of the electromagnetic fields, the energies around you, can allow you to start practicing moving into oneness. So it's where the end of you, it's the edges of you start to disappear, and you start to merge with your surroundings and everything around you energetically. So now labels, boundaries, all of that doesn't exist. And when you take all of that away and the perception of matter away, what you have left is energy. And there's practices where you can start to allow yourself to merge with the fields of those around you, the other beings around you, which are what trees and plants and anything that has consciousness is, right? So you can enter into that space when you start to recognize that the energy that moves through that particular tree or that particular plant or through the moss is the same energy that moves through you. Then all of a sudden, those boundaries or formations that create division and separateness starts to dissolve. And so that's playing with the tremors of it. And then there's the larger events. And I've had a couple of them, with the largest one happening a few years ago. I was crossing through Vancouver, British Columbia, in the US. And the two that I've had, I can't I can't control them. I can't make it happen. I don't know how to make it happen. I think if I could, I'd probably spend a lot of time there, because there's such a high level of love and bliss and gratitude and appreciation, just at a high level, that I've never experienced those emotions before outside of this space. Um, so I'd probably be there a lot. So in this space, the edges of you completely dissolve. And through this level of high love and bliss, separateness dissolves. And separateness is an illusion. And the more separate we feel from our source is a space where we tend to find more anxiety, depression. And this is scientifically proven through the work of Dr. Lisa Miller, who wrote The Awakened Brain or The Awakened Mind. Um, Phenomenal book that backs up, for me, validated my experiences and knowings from a scientific level. And so it's this space where edges dissolve and you merge with all the energy that's around you. And in this space, you receive knowings. And those knowings for me were that we are fragments of source. We are all the same energy, the same consciousness. We've chosen to have experiences. And through these experiences of separateness and division and polarity, we are able to learn more about ourselves and are able to recognize oneness with source and with one another. And so we often hear it referred to I am. But for me in that space, it goes beyond I am. It goes to we are. And then beyond the we are, it's just am. It's just, there is no I. There is no separateness. Did I answer that?
You did perfectly. That was beautiful. I completely understand. And the best way to
Okay.
explain it is in simple terms. You spoke, I mean, I love also the example you gave in the forest of just being connected, oneness or unity consciousness. But you did say there are methods, and I know we're going to get questions about this. What are
Mhm.
your tools or tips for the audience to experience that or to do that practice of complete connectedness?
Mm, that's a great question. And I don't think I could possibly share it enough. And this is a lot of the work that I do today is supporting the clients that I do work with in entering into a space or preparing the body to enter into a space of unity, consciousness, or oneness. And from my experience, it really first starts with going inward and looking inward at the self. And so a lot of people are like, well, how do you do that? Well, I think we've all been told by a family relative or family member to straighten our posture when we were teenagers. And so then we start becoming, we find ourselves slumping and then we catch ourselves and we erect our posture. Or maybe we've got someone outside of us that's, kind of tapping us on the shoulder and reminding us to straighten our posture. And then you start getting into the habit of catching yourself. Well, it's that same behavior when you can start looking inward at your belief systems. You can start looking inward at your inner language and inner dialogue. The more that you can start looking inward at your own experience, we're so conditioned to look outside of ourselves. And it is that process of going inward that allows us to start observing ourselves in day-to-day moments. And then we begin to use meditation. And I know meditation is a super big buzzword. And, I do have clients that come to me that feel resistant to it. Um, they say that they don't know how to do it, they can't do it right. And that's all an illusion. Like, there is no such thing as not doing it right. When you allow yourself to sit in a space of calm and quiet, you're working with your nervous system, you're making sure that you're not in a state of activation or feeling triggered or feeling activated. You find a calm and then you allow yourself to start observing your thoughts and the inner dialogue, the inner chatter. And so now you're observing the mind and the ego. So they're interrelated. How are they moving in this space? So now you're becoming hyper aware as an observer, observing the self. Then there are exercises, as I mentioned, where you can practice it with another, but I don't recommend practicing it with another person. I recommend practicing it in nature. Nature is a source. It is its own entity. The planet is its own entity. It has its own vibrational field. Like, this is a safe space to practice with nature. You can get to the point of practicing it with another once you've recognized that you're doing it well, practicing it in nature, but focusing on a particular tree, focusing, maybe you're sitting in a field of wildflowers and you're allowing yourself to shorten the amount of space between you and this other entity. And you can do it through staring at the tree or the wildflower, giving, and again, allowing the edges of you to completely dissolve. And so we also say that's practicing your clairs, right? So if you close your eyes and you lean into your hearing, what do you hear? So maybe you hear birds, maybe you hear the wind blowing, maybe you hear construction in the distance. Now, instead of focusing on the most what's the word I'm the on the most observable sounds, you start to focus on the ones that are the most distant, the most quiet, the ones that are the least aggressive. And then you start dialing it back even more. And that's how we start leaning into the audible, and practicing and leaning into its clair, right? Strengthening the ability to pick up the sensitivity of that particular sense. And so we do that in a forest. We can do that with a friend. We can do that with our pet, is allowing the edges of you to soften so that you start to merge with that around you.
Yeah, I'd love to move on to shifting, or the shift, or reality shifting. What is
Mhm.
this? And it's absolutely fascinating.
So, reality shifting is something that happens for me right before I enter into an experience of oneness. And it's usually that it's usually a releasing or a letting go of a particular belief. The first one I entered into was the near death experience, when I allowed myself to surrender to the
Mhm.
experience rather than resisting it. The second one happened on the L train subway in New York, moving between Brooklyn and Manhattan. And I was reading a book and I had a huge perspective shift, which ultimately shifted my reality. And then I entered into a state of unity consciousness where it became this illuminated mystical event. Everyone in the subway car was looking at me and smiling, and I felt there was so much love in this particular uh, car, which is very rare to feel in New York City. And there was light coming from inside of each individual, and there was a calmness amongst the group of people. And I entered into a state of bliss. So through that belief, letting go of that belief and dismantling or dislodging it, it was almost as though as my vibration, the frequency of my vibration raised, which entered into a different density or dimension. And so what I've learned from these experiences is that dimensions or densities exist within us. So the whole concept of heaven and hell on earth is actually through our perspective. What are we perceiving reality around us? Because that's what we will manufacture and create. And so through dislodging these belief systems, I was able to raise my frequency and experience a whole different perspective and a whole different density of reality. And that allowed me to start to recognize that we can shift and experience different dimensions throughout the day just based off of becoming the observer of our own mindset and belief systems, and how attached we are in the human ego, and how much distance is created between us and source, which is the illusion of separateness, which is then a space where we start to feel lonely, depressed, anxiety. We go through all of these emotions that we feel that we're suffering from. But this is ultimately a disconnection from source, which is a disconnection from the spiritual self, leaning into the egoic experience, the material experience, making it real. The more we make that the more you make that your reality, the more you lean into a form of suffering. And so the third one that happened in Vancouver, I also had a huge shift in consciousness by letting go of a belief system. I caught myself judging some people that were next to me in another car. And I started to question and observe myself when I heard a voice outside of myself that said, Lelanea, do not judge them. They are you. And that's when I entered into the third unity consciousness or event of oneness, where I received additional information to help support me on my path. And so these reality shiftings is vibrational, and it is a perspective, and it's a choice. All of us have the ability to do this. All of us. And these methods and techniques that I was describing regarding merging with your surroundings changes the frequency of your vibration, and the thoughts and the belief systems that you participate in are a byproduct vibrationally of your experience. As you start to either shift those, it starts to shift your vibration. As you start to shift your vibration, it also affects the beliefs and the mindset that you participate in. So through shifting internally, you create an external reality shift. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Beautifully explained, Lelanea. It's almost like I'm listening to it and I completely understand. And I believe we're shifting in and out of consciousness, different aspects, but it's almost, it's like you jump timelines or aligned with a parallel version of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard it explained that way as well. When I was sitting in the heightened part of the event of consciousness of oneness in Vancouver, I started to understand consciousness is streams. We can't raise our consciousness because consciousness is at its height all around us. We can let go of the barriers that exist between our human form and the consciousness that surrounds us. So it's altering our spiritual bodies, our etheric bodies, right? And so as we start to alter them, then we start to merge with that consciousness. So that technique that I was talking about in terms of experiencing oneness by allowing the edges of yourself to dissolve. When you're in unity consciousness, for me, when I'm in unity consciousness, I start to perceive streams of consciousness that I can participate in. And so I've even been able to look back at myself and the patterns of myself and how I've participated in one particular stream of consciousness. And then I've had a shift and I've jumped, which I just heard you say jump timelines. So then I participated in another stream of consciousness. And if I stay in that stream of consciousness, the events that occur in my life are going to be very different than the events that would be accommodate that other stream of consciousness. And so for me, what I understand a big part of my purpose, and for many other people, we're here to master the human avatar, the relationship to mind, and dissolve that space between the human material experience and the spiritual experience. And as we continue to jump timelines or jump consciousness, we create timelines and probabilities for ourselves that wouldn't exist in other streams of consciousness. So we can play with it. And when you start to become an observer of yourself, you can start to play with these streams of consciousness, and then the probabilities or the possibilities that become available to you that wouldn't have been available before.
Yes. I mean, there's infinite possibilities and probabilities of our
Yeah.
of our parallel timelines. I mean, a great term for it is called reality transurfing. Um,
Mm, I
but
haven't heard that from that
it's a book, and I
particular
can't
phrase.
remember the name offhand, written by a Russian man. It's fantastic. It's incredibly interesting, reality transurfing. Um,
Ooh.
yes. Final question. For those you spoke about the human experience and suffering. For those of the audience that perhaps are going through grief or a loss of loved one or suffering in whatever way it may be,
Mhm.
what is your advice to them?
Man, this is a hard one. And the reason that this is a hard thing to answer is because there are viewers, I'm sure that, for you, there's a full gamut of viewers. You have viewers that are sitting in a lower density that are really trying to explore spirituality and self-help to try to move themselves out of this particular density. And then you have those who are sitting at a higher density. And so the density or the stream of consciousness that we participate in is going to affect our perception of suffering. So, what I can say for myself is when I was sitting at a lower density, which there are times in my life, even after obtaining unity consciousness and having a mystical experience of oneness, that for many in the spiritual community have attempted and wanted to acquire. It's been something that they've wanted to obtain. It just is something that happened for me. And what I can say is that even having been in that space, there's times that I still drop down to a lower frequency and I fall back into a belief system of suffering, how I perceive suffering. And then I'll recognize that my vibration is quite low and I'll start to move myself out of it. And then all of a sudden, my perception of suffering has changed. What I can share with the viewers coming from the perspective of oneness and unity consciousness, being in that space, is what I've learned for myself is that suffering is very much an illusion. So, and that's really hard to say because there's some people who, have small children who have cancer and they're trying to fight cancer, right? There's such huge levels of suffering on this planet. But what I can say for the day to day is look at what it is that you perceive as suffering. What is causing you suffering? And for myself, when I look at something that I'm really suffering from, I recognize it's merely just my resistance to it. I'm resistant to this thing because I have a belief system that if I participate in this thing, that this thing is happening to me because I want to control it and I don't want this thing to happen to me. So now I'm creating suffering for myself. And what I have learned for myself is that when I surrender and when I lean into what it is that I perceive as suffering, that I end up coming out on the other side of it obtaining wisdom and also surrender and relief from that perceived suffering. And when I started changing the way that I perceive those around me, so I've started perceiving people as teachers. What is this scenario teaching me? What is this event teaching me? This particular person that maybe is annoying the holy hell out of me, that I can't stand being around, they trigger the hell out of me. I'm like, what am I meant to learn from this? Why is this person? This is a divine interaction. This person's in front of me for a reason. What am I meant to learn from this? And when I start shifting, here we go, reality shifting.
Yeah.
So when I start shifting my perspective and going, I'm actually here, this person isn't here to torment me. This person's actually here to reflect something back to me, and I'm here to learn something from this person. And as I sit in that space of curiosity, all of a sudden, I'm able to surrender. I'm able to relax. I'm creating less resistance, which means now I'm no longer suffering.
And the shift begins.
And the shift begins. And so the more that you do this, and listen, we all have so many people or things or, that's happening in our lives that we're resistant to, that we don't want. And the more that we start picking at them and leaning into them and going, okay, I'm pushing away from this. Why am I pushing away from this? What'll happen if I just freaking lean into it and just bury myself into it? That, like, it is so, that's where you truly become an architect of your own reality. You become a creator. And we've got so much content moving around the planet regarding manifestation. This is the foundation of manifestation. This is how you manifest, is becoming a creator and an architect of your own reality.
Lots to process and think about. Thank you so much. On a final note, is there anything you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't
Mm.
asked you?
I'm not feeling called to
Mhm.
express anything in particular. I just feel called to remind everyone that um, you are the creator of your own reality. You are an architect. You're powerful. And it's very much a part of separateness, the illusion of separateness that we fall into, where we forget how powerful we truly are. And we start creating a mindset and a belief and a reality that reflects that back. So I'd like to invite you into, at least a month of where you challenge yourself on a regular basis. You challenge your beliefs, you challenge your mindsets, you challenge the inner chatter, and you start recognizing how truly powerful you are. And just see how your reality shifts from there. Those are the tiniest little baby steps, and they work.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I think you're amazing, and I really can't wait to re-listen this episode. Thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest.
Louisa, I'm so grateful for you for inviting me, and thank you for having such a gorgeous platform that allows people to come and share information that I don't think is so widely accessible and available. I think it's a beautiful act of service that you're doing for, the collective, and I'm just so grateful that I got to connect with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and
Mhm.
really, really enjoyed this episode today.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Bye.